the girls of hip hop, Missy Elliott.
So
Little
I
Kim, I don't
too
know.
am the beneficiary of affirmative action, but it does not mean that I was not. Oh, here you go again. I thought we left that potato salad back in the last episode.
For Memorial.
What you say? What you talking about, Willis?
Okay.
This is the All Rev'd Up Podcast, Season 7, Episode 3. And I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Irene, before we jump into our conversation about DEI under attack, let us take a moment to thank all of our listeners and viewers. This 7th season is the direct result of your support, your encouragement, and your comments. Mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Keep them coming. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with others.
And as always, a tsunami of thanks for your time, continued listening, your shout outs, and sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family. I would be remiss to not give a tsunami of thanks also to our creative geniuses, our co-producers, Tyler Wright and Cavante Smalls, because without them, there would be no podcast. Ain't that right, Emmett?
That's right. That's right. So I don't even want to imagine anything without them. They are absolutely phenomenal. Now, Irene, it's Women's History Month, and I have been thinking how to celebrate you. And I just want to know, do you even acknowledge Women's History Month? I mean, what is it? Is it, is it the feminist thing? Is it the womanist thing? I mean, talk to me.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for asking. The employment, though, is not as high and busy as High Black Employment Month, because you see, with me, they get Women's History Month, they get June Pride, and then they get Black History Month. Mm-hmm. But absolutely here. One of the things that I try to do, and many organizations that I belong to, certainly highlight the voices of the unseen and the unheard, the heroes and sheroes. We because we always do this here, that without us there are no brothers, and without there could be no brothers, no sisters without us. But we certainly highlight the courageous and bodacious work of many Black women. And listen, and it's not just Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. Okay. I just need to say that our pantheon is pretty expansive, past and present. And if you say present, you can put Oprah in there, but it's even more than just Oprah. The canon is quite huge. But thank you for asking, Emmett. That's sweet.
Absolutely.
The University of Florida becoming the latest school to eliminate all diversity, equity, and inclusion program positions due to new state rules. ABC's Jay O'Brien joins us with the details on that. Good morning, Jay.
On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was viciously murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, rekindling age-old conversations about racial justice, racial equity, and the validity of diversity, equity, and inclusion work in organizations. Many corporate, nonprofit, civil, and higher education organizations quickly made statements affirming and in some cases double downing on the DEI work they were committed to. Statements disavowing systemic racism, statements advocating for more inclusive practices, and statements of belonging permeated all forms of media. Yet, almost 4 years later, where are we, Irene? I mean, for real, what planet are we on?
We're not even, so interesting. We're not even at the beginning of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We have gone back so far in terms of civil rights. But DEI has become weaponized in the same way that critical race theory has,
Mm-hmm.
affirmative action, the
Mm-hmm.
1619 Project, the banning of books. And people forget that DEI really was supposed to be a corrective to 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate and unequal. But what did we get with DEI, the way it was rolled out? We got lip service. It was a reactive approach rather than a proactive approach to the events of 2020. And we got to also realize that what else was going on in 2020 was that we were suffering with COVID, and
Yes.
Black people and other people of color were dying disproportionately. We also got to understand this, and I have to say this: we talk about the horrible tragedy, but it was really a public lynching. We saw
Mm-hmm.
that in real time, but also that Breonna Taylor was killed,
Yes.
Ahmaud Arbery, and the list is endless. And what we're seeing with this sort of retrenchment of D&I, or the dismantling, or just the easy collapsing of it, depending on how you look at it, is that those who were last hired are the first fired
Mm-hmm.
in this dismantling of DEI. And so I say this here because I want to use the former president of Harvard. See, she was no, she was. We laugh, but we're shocked. She was the last hired, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but the first fired in 6 months. The first ever in the history of Harvard University. I think I was a tad. I think I was a tad naive. I really thought that with the tragic incident of George Floyd and the groundswell of people from not just here in the United States, but the globe,
Yeah.
that finally we got to see just how systemic racism plays itself out, and not just with police. Now, this was a police incident, but I thought we had turned a corner when there was Hurricane Katrina, remember? And we saw the devastation of people in the Ninth Ward, that we understood now that the descendants of slaves, particularly, are still suffering. But, there's something about the tenacity of white supremacy and its enduring power. I need to say this. I'm
Yeah.
not applauding it, but I need to say that. And I feel, Emmett, I think we as African Americans have not learned some of those lessons that were there back in the day when we were Black entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
We still own our HBCUs, but I think we need to look at this because we're really at an existential point now in 2024 with Trump. Might likely return to the White House. He said it was going to be a bloodbath. He said he was talking about something else, but I think most of us understood that this man, should he be inaugurated again, I think we'll be back to a full-blown civil war. I think we saw beginnings of it. If we didn't understand it, January 6th.
January 6th. Yeah.
January 6th. So I think Emmett helped me because I don't know what to think.
I chuckled because I think in the 3 episodes of this 7th season, we have mentioned Claudine Gay every episode, right? And it certainly was not intentional. So I think that shows the residual trauma of this situation and the impact on it, literally to both of us. Let me do a historical piece here.
Let's say that because we're both in the academy, and we know
Yeah.
how hard. Wait a minute, we know how hard first to get hired,
Yeah.
and then listen, you're a dean, and to ascend to such
to the highest level at this prestigious institution. Let me do a little history here, because on March 6, 1961, it was President John F. Kennedy who signed Executive Order number 10925 that mandated that government contractors, and I quote, take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated fairly during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. And we look at 1961 as kind of the beginning of this affirmative action movement. We remember that in 1964, the Civil Rights Act prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and a national origin. And then it was in 1965 that President Lyndon B. Johnson signed Executive Order number 11246, requiring government employers to hire without, and I quote, hire without regard to race, religion, and national origin. And so we go back to these two presidents, right, back in the 1960s, who attempted to do something affirmative on behalf, right, using executive order. But then we get to where we are now. March 2023, Texas House of Representatives passed a bill with a rider in it that banned the use of state funds for DEI programs in universities and colleges. And then in May of the same year, May 2023, Texas passed legislation banning offices and programs promoting DEI at publicly funded colleges and universities. And then, if that wasn't enough, January 2024, Florida Board of Education banned federal and state money being used towards DEI programs and universities, in essence saying that any public school that uses funds, whether federal or state, for DEI, we're going to wipe those offices out and we're going to get rid of those people. So how do we come from the 1960s, part of the history that is still in some history books, even though they're banning all kinds of stuff? How do we come from that moment to where we are now, where it's just an eradication of anything that has anything to do with DEI?
And you know what? And I want to say one of the early signs of DEI, believe it or not, was Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate the schools. But see, one of the things I'm always baffled by, it's sort of like the winners tell history and stuff. Yeah. So I mean, once we see such movement that you had certainly illustrated in the 1960s. So we get to the 70s and we get to the Bakke case. Reverse discrimination.
University of California.
So one of the things we got to understand is this here. So they used racial. They used what was the term here? It was reverse discrimination. They said there was racial quotas as opposed to racial preference to sort of equalize the kind of discrimination that certainly took place. I think this is one of the things that I feel now that I begin to understand. One of the things I realize about the opposition or the right here, they use liberation terms, like King's statement. They take these terms that we use and they flip it on their heads and use it to their advantage. Use it so much that it becomes toxic and it has no meaning and stuff. And I think part of it that while we are certainly seeing how the right, has turned, the 1619 project, and that's so evident based. That's evident based. The Pilgrims came 1620. We came up in here in chains in 1619. But I think there are a couple of things that we have to be really more aggressive than, or as aggressive as the right is, I should say. And I'll give you an example, Emmy. Let me just tell you. So at one point we were kind of baffled, meaning those of us who were trying to understand evangelicalism. Now you had for a good while given us some good examples of it, but I began to understand this, that it was an identity, okay, meaning you didn't have to go to church. It was an identity. It certainly was a politic because we saw that in the Republican Party here. We also understood it geographically, as well as we then understand it, which I think a lot of us did. We understood it as an ideology. So I think what we got to understand is that we got to understand how the right is able to, morph itself continuously to fight its battle. I'm hoping that we meaning those of us that are in the left or just anti-Trump, can do something similarly as a counter response here. But I just want to say this, but as Black people, I need to say this because I know that I was watching the NAACP Awards and Queen Latifah came out with, you got to vote. It opened up with Kyla. Not with Kyla. I'm sorry, Kyla. I'm looking at you. It opened up with Kamala. And and she's calling in and say, tell, tell this audience to vote, which is all Black, predominantly Black here, and stuff. But I think that we gotta do better. If we're gonna vote Democratic, which I hope we do, we got to be more proactive about what we want, and want it, non-negotiable.
All right, we got to take a break. We really got to take a break. I think we need 2 breaks right now, but we're going to take one at this point. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We'll be right back.
Major tech companies like Google and Meta have quietly made cuts to their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and they're laying off workers in those departments. And according to job search site Indeed, DEI-related job listings saw a 44% drop from mid-2022 to mid-2023.
This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We're back. That was a segment from Fox News show Outnumbered back in December 2023. Wow. Irene, DEI must die.
Yeah.
What do we do with that?
I don't, this is what I think here. I mean, what we've been seeing is a politics of revenge, and for a good time. I think it has reached a crescendo at this point because, see, I felt that we've been seeing a retrenchment since Ronald Reagan, and I know this is for any of you were born
back in the 80s.
Okay, but I began to see that the moment that the Bakke case was won, that's reversing affirmative action. There's just been this serious chipping away. We still deal with voter suppression, but I think something that we're not facing here, to me, I think we need to say that we are at a civil war. We've seen it not just with African Americans, but other, minority demographic groups, LGBTQ. We see this. Listen, we see this with the reversal. Listen, I was alive. You folks weren't. None of you. But I was alive when Roe v. Wade was ratified. Well, see, that's part of it, because part of it is like, to me, if you don't have a full panoramic view of the issue, and you start at a certain point but leave out what's happened before, you get a very truncated version of how long this has been going on. But see, so I think we're looking for something like what started the first Civil War. We want the cannons to go off, but to me the cannons went off before January 6th. I mean, this really, to me, is a contest between democracy and white supremacy, and it's been that. It's been that. It's been that since, to me, Reconstruction. And when I say that we need a more innovative approach in organizing, we need to we need better messaging. I just think that part of it is because I think we give folks who believe in, I guess, a better America's better angels are living from some sense of privilege and or historical amnesia. You work with me.
You laid it out beautifully, because during the season of enslavement, which was a number of hundreds of years, we were prevented to learn how to read and write, right? So that memory and accessing the information, we didn't necessarily have access to it, except for the fact that we were brilliant, resilient, and smart. And so even with the notion of this banning of books and bannings of histories, the attempt is to eradicate that long view, right? That memory that goes back to the things that you're talking about. And if you can rip off or take that off, then a person only has their own existing memory and their own reference points. So you're right. A lot of people don't remember trickle-down economics and Ronald Reagan and his attack on inner city populations and people. Many people don't remember those things. And the fact is, many people don't remember how certain guns and weapons got into these inner cities because we weren't manufacturing them ourselves. Right.
Crack cocaine,
right? So when you look at all of those and you look at that in the whole view, you're absolutely right. So here's the reality. The reality is sociologists and demographers are suggesting that the United States of America by 2045 will be a flipped nation, meaning those who currently position themselves and see themselves as the majority will be in the minority. And so that anxiety and that fear for what you talked about, revenge, I think that that's creating a last hoorah of white supremacist ideologies and white supremacist, vigilantism. So I agree with you that we are in a civil war. And you're right, it's not with muskets and it's not with grenades, but it's certainly in the economic warfare and the positioning of who gets jobs and who doesn't get jobs, who gets homes, who doesn't get homes, who gets access to generational wealth, and who gets to be president
of Harvard.
Right. I mean,
Harvard. But
for real.
I need to, and one of the things I want to say here, and now you were born now at this time, Emmett, but the other two, our producers, Kyla and Kavante, weren't.
I feel like you leaning into ageism here. I'm really feeling this.
Baby,
I'm feeling ageism.
Well, I'm the first one. I'm the first one to call it. But
I
the
know.
point, I'm the first one to call it. But this is what happens here. So we say we seem surprised, and I don't know why. I mean, so let's just look at Baby Bush. I can't even deal with Papa Bush, but Baby Bush. He talked about compassionate conservatism, and it was anything but compassionate. But we talk about another time that the election, the only time that in my lifetime that I know that an election was stolen was the race between Gore and Bush. His brother, meaning Baby Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, was governor of Florida. Right. And these were these hanging chads. God forbid if you named your child Chad that year, but you had these hanging chads. And but it turned out that the decision was that Bush won. Gore very gentlemanly, rescinded. Unlike Trump. But the point is that I feel like we this shock and awe should be fatigue at this point, because you don't get to this moment just by January 6th. A lot led up to that. A lot leads up to even now, the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And I think one of the things I've learned being a child of the civil rights movement, that it's always an ongoing process. It's always. And I think that some folks, particularly I think white folks, can lean into, this is a good time. We're not where we used to be, but now we're further back than we were in the 60s at this point.
Well, one of the things that is really interesting during COVID, we had the numerous protests and marches where young people made the choice to come out of their homes and to march on the streets.
Right.
And when I looked at these young people, I saw not just Black people.
Yeah.
I saw the grandchildren of some of the most heinous and vile racists. I saw the grandchildren of some of the, right-wing evangelical, and you can list those different populations, but I saw their grandchildren out marching in the streets. And I do know that there is a changing tide that is going on, which is why we have a generational issue going on, which is why the two leading candidates for president of the United States are old white men. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that the Congress is majority old white people. It makes sense to me because there's a changing tide that is happening generationally. That
but
these 20 and it's not fast enough. I agree with you, but these 20 and 30-year-olds are coming, and I believe they have a different vision for what this nation could and should look like.
But they're not. But see, this is my problem. See, if I like to ride on their optimism and their energy and their fervor, but I did that for a moment, and a number of us did, and had they promised to do what they said they would do, Bernie would have been president, because Bernie Sanders had the young folks. He had a kind of groundswell that I've never seen before, to see folks come out the way they did. I mean, it kind of reminds you of the 60s because, the 60s, you had the Vietnam War, you had the women's movement, you had people coming out trying to change the course of our democracy. I never thought for once when they said the browning of America that transition would be where, okay, white people wouldn't be in power. I think that what we didn't understand is that with the demographic change, we needed to also change the complexion of those in power, because then we will have something that was like apartheid, a people of color majority with a white, leadership here. But I just feel this here, that if Trump does, get in office, and he may very well now at this point, I just want you to know that Canada's looking pretty good to me.
Child, I'm going south, not north.
I'm not going south. Oh, well, south, meaning where? Okay.
I'm going to find me an island.
That kind of south. Okay. That kind of, because you can't go any more south than Florida.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I got to go past Florida. I don't even touch Florida. I stay away from Florida.
Yeah.
And
the NAACP has put out a travel advisory saying to not only Black folks, but to Black students attending these universities, particularly those that are athletes, that do you want to be in this state that you have not nary a protection?
Well, I think we all need to be honest about that, and we should be honest and vocal about it. And speaking of vocal, let me close us off for tonight, or for today.
Okay, but did we solve the problem, though? Did we solve the problem?
No, we're not going to solve the problem. We're not going to solve it. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. We're not going to solve the problem because we've been here before.
I know.
And we will certainly be here again. From the debates of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington to the work of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, from the visionary activism of Ella Baker to the marches of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We've been here before, and we will certainly be here again. From the work of the Niagara Movement through the NAACP and on to the Urban League, the SCLC, and on to all the Black fraternities and sororities, we've been here before, and we will certainly be here again. From Black churches to HBCUs, from freedom schools to hip-hop ciphers, we've been here before, and we will certainly be here again. From 1619 and before to 2024 and beyond, we've been here before, and we will certainly be here again. In the words of the old spiritual, we've been buked and we've been scorned. There is trouble all over this world, but I ain't gonna lay my religion down. So we keep on praying and we keep believing that the divine will do something pretty spectacular and majestic that will challenge the humans to be better to one another. Someday, one day, we shall overcome. Amen.
Amen.
And Ashe.
Ashe.
All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back